Welcome to World War II Indiana Landmarks, Episode 16, The Candles Museum in Terre Haute. I'm your host, Ron May, author of the book World War II Indiana Landmarks. For today's episode, we travel southwest along Interstate 70 to the city of Terre Haute, home of the Candles Museum and Education Center. The most horrific and tragic chapter of World War II was the murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis. One of the lesser-known atrocities committed during their reign of terror was the deadly medical and genetic experiments on 1,500 sets of Jewish twins at the Auschwitz death camp in Poland by the Nazi SS doctor Joseph Mengele. Candles Museum and Education Center in Terre Haute tells the personal story of two of those twins, Eva Mozes Kor and her sister, Miriam Mozes Kor, who suffered through the terrible ordeal and survived. The Mozes twins were born in 1934 in the village of Ports, Romania, near the border with Hungary. They were the youngest of 4 daughters born to Alexander and Jaffa Moses. The twins entered the world just as the Nazi Party had taken control of Germany, was expanding across Europe, and was spreading its campaign of hatred and discrimination toward European Jews. While the Moses family enjoyed a time of relative peace for the first 10 years of Eva and Miriam's young lives, they lived under the growing threat of anti-Jewish fervor. In 1940, their country, Romania, joined the Axis powers, and the village of Ports came under a Hungarian Nazi armed guard. Dark days of discrimination and hatred were suddenly upon the Jews in Romania. Their lives changed forever in 1944, when the family was forcibly relocated by the Nazis from their home to a regional Jewish ghetto in Romania. Just a few weeks later, the Moses family, along with many other Jewish families in Romania, were loaded onto cattle cars for a long trip north. They were transported to the Auschwitz death camp in Poland. In front of the museum is a section of train tracks reminding the visitor of the awful transport of Jews by train to Auschwitz. Stepping off the train and on to the infamous selection platform, the twins were immediately tagged as potential subjects for Dr. Mengele's experiments with twins. They were quickly separated from the rest of the Moses family. Eva and Miriam never again saw their parents or older sisters, all of whom were put to death in the camp. The Moses sisters became fresh recruits for Dr. Mengele's genetic experimentation on twins. For the next 8 months, they were subjected to painful, degrading, and often deadly genetic experimentation. Most of the 3,000 twins in the camp would go on to die during the rigorous phases of experimentation. Mengele was conducting the risky experiments to learn more about dominant genes in twins and how to manipulate those genes to bolster the reproduction of Germans, what he and most Germans considered to be the perfect Aryan race. At one point in the phases of experimentation, Eva became very ill from an injection, and after 2 weeks in the Auschwitz infirmary, she was almost sent to the gas chamber for extermination. Eva somehow willed herself to survive and get back to her sister Miriam, who was living in one of the barracks for twins. The Auschwitz camp was finally liberated by the advancing Soviet army in late January 1945. At the time of liberation, only 200 children were found to be alive of the 3,000 twins that had been selected for the medical experimentation. Eva and Miriam were among the survivors. Following their release from the death camp, the twins, who had just turned 11 years old, began looking for, but didn't find anyone else in their family who had survived imprisonment at Auschwitz. For 9 months, the Mozes twins were bounced around to 3 different refugee camps. They finally landed back in Romania, where they were raised by an aunt who had survived the war. Both Eva and Miriam later immigrated to Israel in 1950 at the age of 16. Eva joined the Israeli army, while Miriam became a nurse. While in Israel, Eva met Michael Kor, an American tourist who also happened to be a Holocaust survivor. They married in 1960 and came to the United States, settling in Terre Haute, Indiana, where they raised 2 children, Alex and Rena. Eva became a U.S. citizen in 1965. In the early 1980s, Eva began searching for other Auschwitz twin survivors. She enlisted the help of her sister Miriam, who was still living in Israel. To further aid in their effort of reuniting Auschwitz twins, Eva founded CANDLES in 1984. CANDLES is an acronym for Children of Auschwitz Nazi Deadly Lab Experiments Survivors. Eva also returned to Auschwitz for the first time in 1984 to confront her past and tell the story of her family and the Mengele twins. For the rest of her life, she made periodic trips back to Auschwitz, often bringing friends and educators on the tour. In 1995, 50 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, and in memory of her sister Miriam, whose death in 1993 Eva was still mourning, Eva Kor opened the CANDLES Holocaust Museum and Education Center in Terre Haute. The mission of the museum is to contribute to the empowerment of the world through hope, healing, respect, and responsibility by shining a light on the story of the Holocaust, Eva Kor, the Mengele twins, and other survivors. Eva liked the acronym because of its reference to light. She wanted to illuminate the darkness of the Holocaust. During that same year of 1995, Eva did something else remarkable. She publicly pronounced forgiveness upon the Nazis for the pain and suffering they caused her and her family at Auschwitz. Eva arranged to meet a former Nazi doctor named Dr. Hans Munch at the Auschwitz Camp and personally deliver her declaration of forgiveness to him as a former representative of the Nazi Party. Although he had not been at Auschwitz, Munch knew Dr. Mengele and was aware of the atrocities being done there. Acknowledging the guilt of the Nazi regime, he signed a public document testifying to the gas chamber being used to exterminate Jews at Auschwitz. Dr. Mengele, the architect of the experiments on twins, had escaped from Germany after the war and later fled to South America under a false identity. He somehow evaded capture for the rest of his life and was never brought to justice for his criminal medical experiments on 3,000 children. He later died by accidental drowning in 1979 while swimming off the coast of Brazil. DNA tests of his remains in 1985 confirmed that he was the infamous Nazi doctor at Auschwitz. He never knew the forgiveness that Eva had pronounced upon him. The forgiveness theme is a prominent part of the CANDLES Museum. Eva insisted that forgiveness was sowing the seeds of peace. CANDLES Holocaust Museum and Education Center is Indiana's only Holocaust museum and the only museum in the world dedicated to telling the story of Jewish twins subjected to medical experimentation during the Holocaust. Today, through the photographs, documents, memorabilia, exhibits, and audiovisual displays in the museum, visitors are introduced to the Mozes family and their tragic journey to Auschwitz. The rise of Nazi power and the persecution of Jews is also traced through a display at the museum. So also the heinous work of Dr. Mengele and the thousands of twins who suffered and died from his cruel genetic experimentation. The museum also traces the adult lives of Eva and Miriam, who dedicated their lives to telling the story of this dark chapter of the Holocaust. Eva Kor died on July 4th, 2019, at the age of 85. She was in Poland at the time of her death, leading a candles tour to Auschwitz. Thanks to technology, Eva's death has not prevented her from personally sharing her story today. Visitors can still get an interactive experience with her through the museum's new Dimensions and Testimony Interactive Theater, which opened in 2017. The theater shows realistic two-dimension videos in a hologram. In the presentation, Kor sits on a chair in her distinctive blue pantsuit, while photos from her life are projected beside her. Eva and a dozen other survivors had traveled to a Los Angeles studio in 2016, and each was placed inside a geodesic dome with lights and cameras that recorded them answering up to 2,000 questions about their experiences during the Holocaust, as well as their lives before and after. Their responses were indexed by keywords, which were then tied into newly developed voice-speech recognition software. The finished video product allows visitors to ask a broad range of questions and receive their answers directly from the survivors in real time, making it feel almost like a live conversation. And continued conversations are what is needed most to help keep the memory alive of those 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis, the deadly experimentations done on 3,000 twins, and those who survived, like Eva and Miriam. Thanks to Eva Kor and her museum, you can have that conversation with her. Learn more about the Candles Museum and the story of Eva Mozes Kor in my new book, World War II Indiana Landmarks, available for purchase on my website or wherever books are sold. And while on my website, check out my trilogy of Indiana World War II service stories. Thanks for tuning in to this episode.